Well, we're here at the CCA
Yes, sir.
Workbench, and rigs and techniques is something we certainly cover every week, Dave. And we're talking about crappie fishing tonight.
Right.
So,
Well, you know, docks and decks and all that stuff. We can catch fish, a crappie off a dock or in a boat, doesn't matter. But they're all around the docks, especially during the spring and the fall, is when they move up into the shallower waters. In the heat of the summer and even in the cold of the winter, they'll go out into the deep water.
Right.
But in the spring and in the fall, they're definitely around those docks, and they're within reach for those fellas to catch them. Now, there's several ways to catch them. You can use artificial lures, and if you're going to use artificial stuff, the best probably lure of all time is that little marabou jig right there. It's a marabou crappie jig. It's usually going to be green, yellow, or white. Those are the colors that you want to use if you're going to be fishing for a crappie. And that little thing, you can either toss it out and retrieve it, in 1/16 or 1/32 ounce,
Right.
Or you could fish it under a cork. Just like like a popping cork. You can fish a double tandem rig, which a lot of people will put 2 of the little Malibu jigs on.
so this is going to be hanging down.
Correct, and it will hang down, and you can fish it under a cork, kind of like you would with minnows, except for 2 of those. Now, you can also use just a regular ball head jig with a plastic a body on it. What's good about these is you can change the colors at your whim.
Yeah, one color's better than the other. Then
Correct.
You can switch it out.
And you can put
like
put different colors on the
fluke.
sides if you want.
Yep.
And you can put little beetle spin plastics or little minnow styles or whatever. And then this one is a horse head jig. And these are mainly used when the fish are deeper. It's a casting and retrieve type deal. It's got a lot of the horse head jigs have that little spinner blade on them,
Right.
and they can be used for that too. When they're in that deep water at night in the 10-15 foot range, that's when you're going to want to use those heavier jigs, and the marabou jigs are better when they're up in the shallow. Now, you'll see a lot of times you'll go in and see these big giant rods, and you're thinking, wow, that's a 10-foot rod. Why would you use such a long rod to catch a crappie? Well, what these do is these guys will have 8 of these things sitting out on the front of their boat, and they'll troll along with a trolling motor. And they'll have those at different depths. The ones closer to the bow of the boat are usually the deepest ones, and then they go out, usually if they have 8, they have 4 on each side in the front, and the ones to the far outside are the shallower ones. And what they'll try to do is they'll troll along until they get a bite, and then they'll stop, and they'll just sit on that structure, whatever it is, and they'll just jig with either this is a minnow rig,
Right.
but they'll either have a minnow rig like this, a live minnows, or with the 2 marabou jigs, and just sit there, and you can just sit there with that rod, with those rods just vibrating, with that hair, and you'll get bites from those crappie.
Dave, let me ask you, what's with the beads?
Well,
Does
supposedly
that attract?
supposedly that's an attractor for when they come floating down. But it might even be a spacer as well. But I think that they use them as an attractor as well. But anytime you get over the stumps and the deep brush, right now, like the fellow was saying earlier, the fish are in the heat of the day. What you're doing is you're looking on your sounder, and you're trying to find those fish hanging over that deep structure, the deep timber and whatnot. And what you have to do is you have to get your baits in those fish or above them. You don't want to be below them. They're not going to go down for stuff. They're going to be up on the top where you can get a hold of them. I mean, they're going to be up closer to where you want to be able to get that bait right above them, not down below them, in them or right above them. And you can use all kinds. If you're gonna fish with them, try to use an Aberdeen hook. An Aberdeen hook has a long shank on it. There's some VMC Aberdeens. And what an Aberdeen hook is, these fish, if you catch a smaller one and you want to release it, you can just go ahead. You can go ahead and use that long shank to get the bait out.
Right.
And those work really good, especially that size. That's a perfect size for a minnow, and/or you can even put like one of these little Lake Fork plastic minnow jigs on a regular hook and jig it under the bobber. You don't even have to use a minnow if you don't want to keep those minnows alive.
That's a cute little thing, isn't it?
Aren't they? Those are really awesome. And I tell you what, a key thing is is try to figure out your speed when you're slow trolling along.
Right.
you don't want this thing to be blowing in the wind back at a 45-degree angle, because as you're going along, you'll be able to hang up on stuff. And you don't want it to be straight up and down, because when you're straight up and down, you have your minnows and stuff, even with this kind of little doodads to keep them out of the main line, they can get tangled up.
Right.
You want about a 10 to 15 degree angle from the rod tip back to the water. You don't want it to be blowing way back, and you don't want it straight up and down, but that 10 to 15 degree angle, that's the good angle that you want. That'll determine your speed.
That's some good advice,
no
man. I
worries.
like that.
No worries.
It's kind of like dredge fishing, you know, when you're blue marlin fishing,
Exactly.
but smaller.
And you got tons of stuff out there too.
Right.
It's pretty neat.
All right, Brie, we got to go to another region.